The morning I found out my retirement account had been drained, I was wearing the same flannel shirt I'd worn to my wife's funeral 3 months earlier. I hadn't washed it. I'm not sure why I'm telling you that, except that it felt important somehow. Like the shirt was proof that I was still the same man who'd stood in that church in Sudbury and held it together long enough to say a few words about the woman I'd loved for 31 years. But that morning, standing at the teller's window at the TD branch on Elm Street, I wasn't holding together at all. I'd gone in to withdraw $300, cash for the week, gas, groceries, maybe a new set of wiper blades, because the ones on my truck had been streaking since November, and my wife used to remind me every fall to change them, and now there was no one to remind me. Small things. That's what I was thinking about. Small things. The teller, a young woman, maybe 25, dark hair pulled back, typed something, looked at her screen, typed again. Then she looked up at me, and something shifted in her face. "Sir," she said, and her voice dropped to almost nothing. "I need you to step aside with me for a moment." I thought it was a fraud alert, a hold on the account. Something routine. I've been banking at TD for over 20 years, and once they flagged a purchase I made online and put a temporary hold on things, I figured it was something like that. It wasn't anything like that. She walked me to a small office off the main floor, the kind with a frosted glass door and 2 chairs facing a desk. She closed the door behind us and sat down across from me and pulled up the account on the computer screen and turned it to face me. The account that was supposed to hold just over $230,000. My pension contributions. The proceeds from selling the house on Lakeshore Drive that my wife and I had owned for 18 years. Money we'd set aside for decades with the specific, boring, sacred intention of having a comfortable retirement showed a balance of $612. She said, "Do you recognize these transactions?" I didn't say anything for a fun time. "My name is Harold. I'm 58 years old. I was a high school shop teacher in Sudbury, Ontario for 32 years, and before that I spent 4 years doing Finnish carpentry for a contractor out of North Bay. I'm not a man who talks about himself much. My wife Claire used to say that getting information out of me was like trying to pull a nail from hardwood, slow going, and you always felt like you might break something in the process. She was right. She usually was. Claire died in January. Ovarian cancer diagnosed the previous April, gone by winter. We had 8 months, which felt like nothing, and also like a lifetime compressed into something unbearable. She was 54. Our kids were grown. Our son Kevin, 31, who lives in Barrie and works in logistics, and our daughter Lynn, 28, who moved to Halifax 5 years ago with her husband for his job. And then there was our younger daughter Adrian. Adrian is 25. She still lives in Sudbury, less than 20 minutes from the house. The condo I moved into after we sold the Lakeshore property. She works part-time at a yoga studio on Paris Street and takes the occasional online course and has, for as long as I can remember, been the child who needed the most from us. Not in a dramatic way, not the way people imagine when they say something like that. She just always seemed to need a little more reassurance, a little more help, a little more time, and Claire and I gave it. That's what parents do. When Claire was sick, Adrian was there constantly. She drove her to treatments at Health Sciences North. She researched alternative supplements and brought them to the house in little paper bags. She sat with her mother for hours watching those British baking shows Claire loved. And when Claire couldn't manage the bills anymore, the insurance forms, the medication claims, the hydro and property tax, and everything else that comes with running a life, Adrian stepped in and said she'd handle it. I was grateful. That's the honest truth. I was drowning in grief and Claire's care, and the particular exhaustion that comes from watching someone you love disappear, piece by piece. And Adrian showed up and said, "Dad, I've got the paperwork. You just worry about Mom." And I let her. I put her name on the account as an authorized signatory. My banker walked us through it, and I signed something, and I didn't read it as carefully as I should have, and that is something I will live with. Kevin didn't like it. I remember him pulling me aside at the hospital one afternoon. This was maybe June, 5 months before Claire died, and saying, "Dad, you need to be careful about having Adrian on the account. I'm not trying to start anything, I just think you should pay attention." I told him he was being unfair. I told him Adrian was helping her mother in a way that he, 4 hours away with a job and 2 young kids, couldn't. I told him his sister was going through this too, and that we needed to be a family right now and not pick at old wounds. He didn't push it. Kevin is like me that way. He'll say his piece once, and then he'll let it go, and you'll think he's accepted it, but really he's just decided it's not worth the fight. He was right, and I'm sorry it took me this long to say so. The teller's name was Priya. She told me that after she'd turned the screen to face me, and I'd sat there long enough that she'd started to look worried. She told me her name the way you might tell it to someone you're afraid might need comforting. Slowly, making sure I could anchor myself to something. I looked at the transaction history. The withdrawals had started in March. That was 2 months after Claire's funeral. They were irregular, some small, some not. 4,000 here, 800 there. 12,000 in May. 11,000 in late June. They weren't at consistent intervals, which I think was deliberate, though I didn't understand that at the time. They were spread out enough that unless you were watching closely, they could almost look like normal account activity. Bill payments, insurance, household expenses. Adrian had been listed on the account as an authorized signatory, which meant she could initiate transfers. She'd been moving money from the joint account into another account, one I'd never seen, that had her name on it alone, and she'd been doing it since March. Since 2 months after her mother died. I sat in that chair in the frosted glass office, and I looked at those numbers, and I felt something happen in my chest that I don't have a word for. It wasn't just anger, it was something older, and more total than anger. Like the floor had gone out, and the walls and the ceiling, and I was sitting in a chair in the middle of open sky. Priya said, "Sir, I want you to know that this is not your fault, and I want you to know that we have options." I asked her what options. She said that because the signatory authorization had been added to the account during a period of, she paused, chose her words carefully, documented family hardship. There were provisions under the bank's elder financial abuse protocols that could allow for an investigation. She said the word elder, and I almost laughed. I don't feel old. I felt ancient right then, but I don't usually feel old. It landed strangely. She said, "I can connect you with our fraud team today if you'd like, and I'd strongly suggest you speak with a lawyer." I said I didn't have a lawyer. She looked at me steadily and she said, "You should get one." I called Kevin from the parking lot. I don't remember exactly what I said to him. I know I started by saying there was a problem with the account, and then somewhere in the middle of the sentence I stopped being able to talk in a straight line, and Kevin said, Dad, slow down, tell me what happened," and I told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, I need you to listen to me. Don't call Adrian yet. Don't say anything to her. Go home, lock the door if you need to, and I'm going to drive down tonight." "It's 4 hours," I said. "I know how far it is," he said. "Go home." He made it in 3.5. He pulled into the parking lot of my condo building at 10:15 that night, and I was standing at the window waiting because I hadn't been able to sit down since I got home. He came upstairs, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table from the Lakeshore house that I'd moved into the condo because I couldn't bear to get rid of it. And he went through everything with me. Every transaction. He'd been going through the bank statements on his laptop for most of the drive, his wife handling the wheel while he read numbers into a notebook. He found the other account number in one of the transfer records. He found the dates. He found the pattern. He said, "She's been doing this since February, March," I said. He shook his head. "February, look at this one. It's small, $250, but it's there, and it's 2 weeks after Mom's funeral." 2 weeks after we buried his mother, Adrian had moved $250 out of my retirement savings. I thought about the morning of the funeral, about Adrian holding my arm as we walked into St. Andrew's, about the way she'd cried at the graveside. Genuinely, I'd thought, not performed grief, but real grief, and maybe it was real. That's the thing I keep turning over and can't seem to put down. Maybe she was genuinely grieving, and also taking money from her dead mother's surviving husband at the same time. Maybe people are capable of both those things at once. I don't know. I'm 58 years old, and I still don't understand how people work. Kevin hired a lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she was exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when you're dealing with something like this. Calm and precise and completely unimpressed by excuses. She worked out of an office on Notre Dame Avenue, and I met her that Friday and she asked me questions for 2 hours and took notes on a yellow legal pad, and at the end she said, "Mr. Harold, you have a strong case. The authorization was never intended to be a blanket transfer permission, and the pattern of withdrawals will be very difficult for your daughter to explain." I asked about the money. She said, "Realistically, you're going to recover most of it, but it will take time. The bank has insurance." CDIC protections apply in certain circumstances. We're also going to be looking at whether there are grounds for criminal charges. I said I wasn't sure I wanted to press charges. She looked at me the way Kevin had looked at me in the parking lot. Patient, steady, not unkind, but clearly not planning to let me off the hook. She said, "You don't have to decide that today, but I want you to think about the fact that what your daughter did has a name, and the name is financial elder abuse, and it's a criminal offense in this country, and protecting her from the consequences of it is not the same thing as being a good father." I thought about that for a long time. I hadn't spoken to Adrian since the Monday before I went to the bank. She'd texted me twice, once asking if I needed anything from the grocery store, once sending me a link to a documentary about national parks that she thought I might like. Reading those texts in the new context of what I knew felt like looking at a magic trick whose method you've finally figured out. Everything flattened. Kevin was the one who called her. He didn't tell me he was going to. He just did it. One evening when I was in the other room, and I heard the murmur of his voice and knew what was happening. When he came back to the kitchen, he sat down and said, "She cried. She said she needed the money for rent, and she was too embarrassed to ask. She said she was going to pay it back. She said she didn't take that much." I said, $194,000. Kevin nodded. I said, "She moved $194,000 out of my account, and she's saying she was embarrassed to ask." Kevin said, "I know. We didn't say anything else about it that night." What happened next came in pieces, the way things like this always do. You imagine a confrontation, a moment of clarity, and accounting. What you actually get is phone calls and lawyers' letters, and your daughter leaving a voicemail at 11 at night that you listen to twice without calling back, and your son sitting across from you at the kitchen table looking like he aged 5 years in a week. Adrian's husband. She'd married a man named Glenn in 2022, a quiet, amiable guy who did IT work remotely, apparently didn't know, or said he didn't know. Patricia said we should take that at face value for now, and I was inclined to. Glenn called me himself one evening, almost incoherent with apology and what sounded like genuine shock, and said he was cooperating fully with his own finances being reviewed. He said he'd had no idea. He said, "I'm so sorry, Harold, I don't know what else to say." I believed him, I still do. The money had gone to a lot of things. Rent, yes, some of it, but also a credit card debt that Adrian had apparently been carrying since before she and Glenn got married. A car, paid it full in April. A trip to Portugal in May that I'd seen photos of on Facebook and assumed Glenn's employer had covered as a work trip. Furniture, clothes. A private yoga certification course that cost $11,000. Patricia laid it all out for me in a document that was 9 pages long. I read it at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee that went cold and I didn't notice. The criminal charge question came back around in September. By then, the bank's fraud team had completed their investigation and confirmed that Adrian had made 47 unauthorized transfers from my account over a period of 7 months. TD's insurance was going to cover $160,000 of it. Patricia had negotiated a civil agreement for the remainder that was structured as a repayment plan attached to Adrian's income. Slow and uncertain and contingent on a lot of things, but something. Patricia said, "The Crown's office has reviewed the file. If you want to pursue criminal charges, they'll proceed. If you don't, they won't. It's your call." I thought about what she'd said to me the first time we'd met, about what protecting someone from consequences means. I thought about my daughter standing at her mother's graveside. I thought about the $250, 2 weeks after the funeral. I said I needed another week. What changed my mind wasn't anger. By that point, the acute anger had burned off, and what was left was something more like sorrow, which is a worse thing to live inside but easier to make decisions from. What changed my mind was a conversation I had with Kevin one night, when we were both tired, and he said, almost to himself, "If she did this to you, Dad, what do you think she'd do to someone else?" He wasn't trying to make the decision for me. He was just saying what he thought. But he was right, and I knew it. She would do it again to someone, if there were no real consequence. That's not a judgment about her character so much as an observation about the arithmetic of behavior. We do what we're not stopped from doing, most of us. That's not unique to Adrian. I called Patricia and told her to proceed. The charges were filed in October. Financial fraud. Breach of trust. The process moved slowly, the way legal processes in Ontario do, and it was still moving when Kevin's wife had their 3rd child in November, a little girl they named after Claire. I drove to Barrie for the weekend when the baby was born. I held her in the hospital and she was impossibly small and warm, and I sat in the chair by the window, and outside it was snow, the first real snow of the season, and I thought about the shape of things, about how a year can hollow you out completely and then hand you something like this. A baby named after your wife. Snow on the windows of a maternity ward. The particular stubborn way that life keeps going. I thought about a Friday afternoon last spring when I'd driven out to the Vermilion River and sat on the bank for an hour and just listened to the water. I hadn't gone anywhere special or done anything meaningful. I just sat by a river because I needed to breathe and the condo was too quiet, and I'd thought, sitting there, that I might not be okay. Not in the dramatic way. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't in crisis. I was just genuinely uncertain whether I knew how to be a person by myself after 31 years of being a person with Claire. But I drove home from the river, and I went to the bank the next week, and Priya turned the screen around and showed me what had been taken from me. And I made phone calls, and I got a lawyer, and it turned out that I did know how to do this. Not gracefully, not without considerable help, but I knew how to do it. Kevin's daughter slept in my arms while the snow came down outside. I didn't move for a long time. There's a version of this story that ends with a lesson, tidy and complete, about who to trust and who not to. I've heard that version. People tell it to me sometimes when I run into them at the Home Hardware or the Tim Hortons on LaSalle Boulevard, and they want to express sympathy and also feel like something has been resolved. I don't blame them for it. We want things to resolve. What I actually have is this: a daughter I don't speak to, whose case is still working through the courts. A son who drives down from Barrie more than he needs to, which I'm grateful for in a way I don't know how to say. A grandchild named Claire. A condo that's too quiet. An account that's been rebuilt slowly, with the insurance settlement and with the particular economy of a man living alone who doesn't need much. I changed the wiper blades on my truck, finally. In March, which is late, but better than never. I thought about Claire when I was doing it. Standing in the parking lot of Canadian Tire with my hands cold and a fresh set of rubber blades still in the packaging, and I thought, she'd have said something dry and affectionate about me doing it 7 months behind schedule. She'd have been right. I went back to TD a few weeks after everything started, and I asked to be assigned to a different teller. Not because of anything Priya did. She was the one who caught it, after all. The one who said my name quietly, and walked me to the glass door office and turned the screen around. I went back and I specifically asked if I could thank her, and the branch manager walked me over and I shook her hand and I said, "You didn't have to do that the way you did. You could have just told me what you found. But the way you did it matters. I want you to know that." She said she was just doing her job. I said it was a good job. She smiled and looked a little embarrassed, and I went home. The account is mine alone now. No authorized signatories, no convenience, no shortcuts, no handing the wheel to someone else because I'm too tired to steer. I'm 58 and I'm learning to do things I always let someone else handle, and it's slow. And sometimes I feel foolish and sometimes I feel something adjacent to proud. Not proud exactly. More like present. Like I'm inside my own life in a way I wasn't for a while there. That has to be worth something. I think it is.